Welcome back. Right. Well, I hope those were enjoyable check-in spaces for you. Ours was, and there was a suggestion that we talked a little bit about an observation that Justin made about, well, we were all talking about like the quiet spot at the very beginning and how valuable we three find it. And I was sharing how it's something that I've been bringing in to places where where I'm in charge, where I'm the boss, more and more, but also have a kind of reluctance because I'm never quite sure how it is for other people. I want to bring it because I find it so useful. But
Can you say what the it is?
I the quiet spot, the little kind of meditation, um, taking a step back from the computer.
Mm.
Um, and Justin was observing that it feels like it's a really crucial part of building and maintaining a different group culture. That we want to create a culture where we're not driving ourselves the whole time, where we're not rushing from one thing to another, but where we actually kind of create moments of space to just like absorb whatever's just happened and get ourselves ready for the next thing that's going to happen. And it doesn't need to be super long, but it's like part of this culture piece that has come up, several times as we've been going through the weeks, as being, yeah, something that it's is really important to find ways that work and ways that are comfortable for each of us to be able to live that and share that slightly different way of coming at things, so that the processes that we run when we get round to running them, um, have a better chance of not just feeling like people walk into the room and they just make a whole bunch of assumptions about how this is going to go down. And most of those assumptions are going to be someone's going to tell us what to do. I probably won't understand, but that's because I'm stupid. Um, Everyone else here is going to get what's happening much more than me. Or, slash, I know better than anybody else, and I'm going to spend a long time talking and letting people know about it because we tend to separate into two camps, and it's not always gender related, but it can be. Just of either stepping forward a bit too much or stepping back too much. So that whole thing about like, can we create spaces where we feel more comfortable just to show up with who we are in an honest way? Because A, we'll be more emotionally stable and happy in that space. And B, can't remember. It went straight out of my head. um, I guess it was about I guess it was about like the kind of quality of conversation that we have when we're relaxed and happy and feel accepted, and like we're welcome in the situation that we're in, rather than that there are expectations that we may or may not understand. That's all I wanted to say. Was there anything else, Justin, you wanted
I
to
just
add?
wanted to, yeah, I just wanted to add a joke to that. Uh,
Okay.
so there's just a joke I heard yesterday, which I thought was quite funny, I mean, it's about this need to be able to rejuvenate ourselves and slow down and make space, which I'm not good at. And the joke is, what's the difference between a light bulb and an activist? When a light bulb burns out, it stops working. So it's just something about like actually we need to be able to stop working. We need to be able to stop this, just actually pause. And I'm only saying this because it's very hard for me to do.
Very sad joke, Justin.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chelsea. Well, I'm talking about
You-
me. So it's not a joke, it's not a joke at anybody else's expense, as it were. This is like trying to learn to not burn out and trying to learn to take care of ourselves and therefore of each other. So anyway, while still continuing the struggle, because there's a real struggle to undertake. It's not simply about self-care, it's about care of that bigger self, but how to do that in a way that is mutually supportive. And I've certainly found these sessions really brilliant with with Eva doing that at the start. So yeah. I'll pass it back. Sorry if that joke went down badly.
Right. So, um, what we wanted to start off talking about was just some sort of practicalities around this. Okay, so the assembly's finished, what next? And of course, one of the kind of tools that we have is this idea of these 3 pathways. So we're using assemblies because we want to make change fundamentally. If there's no change that happens in the world after an assembly, then it's not been a very successful assembly. Some of the changes, like this pathway 1 change, may only happen in the kind of personal realm of some of the individuals in the process. So for some people, just having experienced a different kind of way of meeting, getting their voice heard, people being interested in what they have to say, working collaboratively with other people, all those things that we're hoping for everybody who comes along, even just that personal experience is a change in the world. It's not one we necessarily get to see or hear about, but it is a change in the world, and it's important. And in some ways, it could be the most important, because who knows what the future holds. And if we have a society where a few more people have experienced that it's possible for us to meet and come to decisions together as a community in a way that doesn't set everybody against one another, then even just that's good. So these are quite low bars. We're going to have a very unsuccessful assembly if nobody has experienced that. So that's our pathway 1, or whatever we end up calling it. The pathway 2 is all these little things that could happen just because people in the community have identified an issue and can see a solution. And they're the kind of low impact, well, not necessarily low impact, low threshold actions that we don't need a lot of money for, and we don't need a lot of official permission for. So we can use our people power, our community power, the fact that we've got together and had a talk about this, to just go ahead and do something. So that might be community gardens, that could be community fridge, that could be a babysitting circle, the small, cheap interventions you don't need permission for. Pathway 3 is probably larger interventions where you are going to need people in power to fundamentally to give you permission. So how you get that permission is really, really various. So you may be making good relationships with local councillors and trying to get some funds from the local authority, or get permission to use a certain area of space for something that the community needs, or planning permission to do a local solar farm or a wind turbine. You may need to interact with funders to get money to do those kind of big infrastructure projects. Or you may be looking at sort of national government needing to pass laws, like with the kind of land reform stuff that happened. None of those land reform community buyouts could have happened without policy change. And it kind of went hand in hand. There was pressure from communities wanting to do that drove the development of those policies. And it can also look like camping outside Holyrood until you get what you want, or writing letters and collecting signatures on a petition. So it doesn't have to be cooperative and collaborative necessarily. It can be quite oppositional, but you're basically, one way or another, you're interacting with power holders. And the 4th pathway is the one that we're making up as we go along, where we are, this is part of our 4th pathway. This is trying to seed assemblies in different communities across Scotland, because once we've got some assemblies happening, they can start meeting up, they can start talking to one another, and they may then have much more sense of agency and much more sense of, oh right, so we can use our combined power to do something bigger that's good for all of us. or to, approach the Scottish government with much more clout, or to decide that we're not going to listen to Scottish government, we're just going to do something that we want to do anyway. There's a whole range of possibilities, and in a way we don't know how far that could go. In the one of the theories is that we could be at the very beginnings of building an alternative power structure that uses power really, really differently, which can help us to transition from this really toxic, disastrous experiment that we've been doing for the last few thousand years into something that's much more human and humane, that understands how people work, that really tries to share power equally, that accepts, and not accepts, but values place and the planet and our relationships much more than it does investment and financial growth and all that sort of stuff. So those are that's the kind of roadmap of the different kinds of things that can come out of your assembly. And with any luck, there'll be one or two of each of those. Or then maybe you're just going to major on one. And it can be difficult to tell in advance how that's going to be. I wanted to talk a little bit about Tory, and I think, do we have a slide for Tory? Yeah, you made a slide. Hang on a minute. I'll just share my screen. And zoom down here.
It's
That's the
40.
one.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, down below
There
that.
we go.
Keep going down. It's down a bit.
There we go. So one of the kind of most immediate things to come out of the Tory Assembly was this declaration. This on the right here is a page from it. It was a kind of 16-page A5. It ended up, we got it printed up, but it was a kind of series of statements that people had made during the assembly, and Justin and a few other people were taking notes of what people were saying as we went through, and then in the afternoon they spent some time kind of working it up, and then we read it out at the end and got agreement from everybody in the room that this was something that this assembly wanted to say, the statement that we wanted to make. On the right here, this is the last page. So a lot of the declaration was talking about the various different really bad things that have happened to Tory, and a kind of more in-depth statements about that people said, both about like how angry they were, but also about their hopes for their community. So these 6 points were things that we said that we were going to do. So point one is about really fighting for the park, and really trying to stop the local authorities' plan to rezone it as not a park but an opportunity zone. And I don't know whether you know, but there was quite recently they were granted thing. Justin, help me with the word. Judicial review, which means that all work on the park has to stop, and the judicial review is whether the initial decision by the council to rezone the park was lawful. So that might take up to like 2 years. Just hang on 2 ticks. That's a son with dinner. Okay, step 2 was just about using the park and valuing it, and making sure that other people use it. And that so that was a kind of aspiration, but as part of the community work, that community networking that happened, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute, that turned into an application to the Green Participatory Budgeting Fund that Aberdeen's just introduced, for an outdoor classroom that has been accepted, and it's going to be opened on the 15th of June as part of an event in Tory. We demand that the incinerator be decommissioned as number 3. That not much work has happened on that. I mean, what I think we understand is that the incinerator is likely to be illegal within the next few years, but at the moment it still continues. And we've been incredibly busy doing other things. So that one has not moved forward as far as I know. Number 4 was we'll seek to set up a Tory retrofit project. And this was something that happened not totally by chance, because the kind of backstory is that there's been a group of guys, mostly engineers, who are really, really keen on doing a community-wide retrofit somewhere in the Northeast. And they've been searching and searching and searching for a community to do it in. But they heard about the Assembly, they came along and suggested conversation during the open space about a retrofit project. It was very well attended. Lots of people very enthusiastic by the end, and that project has continued. Will get some more funding next year, and will become led by a community-led conversation, and that's another thing I want to say a little bit more about. Number 5 was insisting on a just and fair energy transition, which in some ways the retrofit also does. And will strengthen collaboration within our community and with others. So this was somebody, and actually the person who inspired my thinking around the Pathway 1. This was a woman who had never been active in her life before, and she had worked very hard. She'd had a career and she'd had kids, but she hadn't ever done any community work. And having been part of the steering group and then coming to the Assembly lit a fire in her. And she did a huge amount of community networking after the Assembly, which was, and it was one of her meetings where this idea about a community classroom kind of came together and became a bid. So that was, I suddenly saw how just one individual, like everybody, ideally, if you have a magic wand, all that needs to happen in your Assembly is that everyone who comes along goes, oh, this can't happen unless I do something. So I'm going to. And it doesn't have to be huge, but it's that stepping into responsibility that's really hard to get people to do, but it's the thing that changes everything. So yeah, so that was one of the things. So I think we got like 4 or 5 out of 6 of those things that were in the declaration that happened on the day have actually started. And the 2 that I wanted to follow up a bit more with was it was the community classroom and Linda really kind of like doing all that community networking. The other thing was the retrofit project. It's super interesting what's been happening. So after the Assembly finished, I was quite surprised that the steering group wanted to carry on meeting, because for me the steering group was the thing that set the Assembly up, but they'd had such a lovely time and they'd made such nice relationships. They were really keen to carry on meeting. So we carried on meeting. We met monthly in person and monthly online, so that we were basically meeting fortnightly. But as we went on, we realized that we were trying to deal with an awful lot, because we were dealing with the classroom project, the retrofit project, and an event that we wanted to do on the 15th of June, a big sort of community event, all in the one meeting. And even with a kind of half-day meeting for the in-person meeting, it was becoming a huge amount. So we split into working groups, each one taking one of those things. And then what happened was a lot of the energy went out of the Assembly group. It was like the working groups are the ones that were actually getting stuff done. The Assembly group suddenly went, what are we here for? And it wasn't 100% clear what they were here for. So that, I think that group is going to kind of fall away. But the classroom has happened. The community networking has happened. Oh, and there was a website as well, an idea for a community website that somebody else who was part of the steering group really wanted to get happening, and that's being launched in June too. And the bit I wanted to tell you about was the community, the retrofit project. So I'm really interested in how the organization that takes that project and makes it happen. This is possibly a 15-year-long project to retrofit everything in Torry. It's going to need a huge amount of funding, but we're really keen that it's community-led and community-owned. So how do we square that big organization with loads of money with genuinely led by the community? So I've created a proposal that we're looking at to run it on quite strongly sort of sociocratic principles, so that there's a kind of general circle where various other working circles can feed into. But there's what we would normally have as the board is the community circle. And that is populated by people who are in other organizations in the community, and also people can just get voted onto it. And that the organization has its AGM, possibly 6 monthly, as an assembly. So there's an engine there that will keep on organizing assemblies. And there's a reason for people to come to assemblies, because this project that is influencing their lives quite strongly is going to be making decisions there. So whether this works or not, I'm really interested in that, like how you institutionalize power. Because one of the things that's really weak about our assemblies at the moment is that they don't have very much real power. And why would you go along and spend a whole day at an event that can't really do anything? You know, we've just discussed how it actually can do quite a lot, but persuading people about that at this stage is quite difficult. When we have got, 20 assemblies in Scotland all churning out projects, it'll be a different story. But at this stage, there's a real persuasion job to be done. And what we could see over time is that, an assembly might not sit continually, because there might not be issues that the community want to consider continually. But there might be an organization that becomes like a kind of an institution within the community that's able to call assemblies when people in the community come to it and say we need one, or when it becomes obvious that we need one. So that kind of whole conversation about how this becomes a transfer of power to communities, and how those communities then communicate with one another, may be partly answered by this idea of having kind of powerful institutions that are truly community led, really, really accountable and answerable to their communities, that are doing material kind of economic changes within the community. I think that was all I wanted to say. I put it past Justin to hoover up after me. Thank you.
No, I think that was great. I don't no hoovering required. As far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't know whether you want to shift over to, if folk want to ask questions or raise points around that, or do you want me to shift to the Porty experience, or what's your sense?
Well, I think there's other things to be learnt from the Portobello experience, and also a little bit to learn from the Scottish Parliament Citizens' Assembly. But I guess if there's anything burning from what I've just said that people want to comment on or ask a question about, then we could just have a check for that. And if not, we could head on to you. Anyone got anything?
Or we could, if there's nothing to clarify immediately, we can come back to it then.
Yeah.
That's probably best. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Anna.
Oh.
Yeah, just briefly. I'm hearing you very attentively, and like throughout all the course, I always have to do this exercise. I guess it's the case as well for Angela, and I think there was someone else in other countries where like, okay, how do we adapt to the reality here? And I mean, I'm actually involved in this group. Part of us are climate justice, but not all. And we're like wanting to grow, and we want to create an actual initiativa legislativa, basically an initial proposal that will be then given to the government after we've collected. We're now like closing, nearing 1,000 signatures, and we'll continue. And so then I mean, from pathway 3 to pathway 4, that seems to be such a long stretch, and like I do believe this, like really, you guys made me believe this, that this is really the way, and I'm not seeing anything else that gives me so much hope. But at the same time, I'm confronted every day with people's lack of belief that this can be binding enough. And yeah, I don't know if you have
Can I
any.
just respond a little way to that before Brian comes in? Just I guess there's a different level I found in Portobello where I live, that getting people to realize that they can do stuff, which is what Eva was raising earlier, is quite a big deal. And people kind of realizing that it's possible. So I've just come from a meeting outside the police station where we're looking at taking over the police station. That's the next step. And that now is something that people can talk about sort of seriously, having seen what we've done before, collectively, what we've all done before. And that wouldn't, I mean, a few years back, that wouldn't have been, I would have just been laughed at like I was before and was suggested some other stuff. But as you show that you can do stuff, then people really start to see that. And I guess that shift to the fourth pathway there is part of that move of kind of going, okay, of course it's impossible. We're in a system that makes it impossible to do any of this. So we have to act as if it is possible for it to become. I mean, I know you know that fully well. I'm just saying there's a connection to showing that it's possible within your own community, so people can make that step to then being able to go, okay, now we need to do this collectively because we can govern ourselves, we can take care of each other. We don't need a system that's exploiting people and planet to look after us, which is what it persuades us to do. We can do it ourselves. It's not helping. And that's a big shift in terms of how we've been trained to be obedient to those in authority, and to our only hope is that solutions are imposed on us. So getting that realization that we can actively do stuff together. I'm just trying to make a link between doing that locally is part of then being able to do that. And I think it's quite miraculous generally how it works. That's not necessarily the right word, but you can't tell how it's working. But that does happen in societies. They change, and all societies change over time, and all societies change quite dramatically and quite quickly. And they always think it's impossible when they look forward, and they always think it was inevitable when they look back. It's just there's that moment of it, something looking impossible. But when it's kind of required, as it is for us now, we won't survive unless we do change. Then the kind of impossible can become inevitable in that way. So I think there's something about not getting too vanguardist and having too much of a big plan and so you must all, if only everybody did what I thought, then it would work, which is the usual thing with change in that way. So it's really we're trying to allow it to be much more loose, but having a vision of we can collectively connect to do this, and demonstrating it by we can collectively do that in a community. So that's why the community stuff is so important, rather than jumping ahead too fast. But at some point that water has to boil, but then it does, that never looks like it's going to boil, and then it does boil. So sorry, that was a bit of a poetic response. I apologize for that, but that was yeah.
I love that it's inspiring and all together. So.
Okay, so do you want to go to Brian first, then I'll come on to Porty after that?
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines that the People's Assemblies are a new way of holding meetings that involve a lot more people in a much more friendly way than we're used to in terms of officialdom.
It's a great way of putting it.
What I'm thinking about is that you have this information system that goes from the bottom all the way to the top, but they have teeth in the sense that we don't bear these teeth unless we have to. So that is activism. So eventually, at some stage, we might actually have to ask everybody to go out the streets to get what we desire. What the information has showed that the people have said they want, and the political means or the authorities don't give us that, then we need to say, well, we're not going to put up with that. We're going to do something else. But hopefully that never actually happens. But we do have the teeth that we can show. And what I'm thinking is that the funding aspect of it, because that's really where the power lies with the funding. And if we can have a legal binding that says that funding can only go in a way that's matched to the information that's gathered. So if you think about the whole of Scotland, passing that information up, that information is available for all to see and isn't hidden, then that information could be shown to actually go along with the funding. And that might be a way of getting power to the grassroots.
That's lovely. And transparency is absolutely key in that, which I think is what you're saying. And I mean, the three powers that we're working with is the power of finance and economics, and the power of politics and decision-making, and the power of culture and belief, and enabling us to do things that we don't otherwise think are possible. And you're focusing on one of those. I think that's really important. It's important to, I think of it as like a padlock. a combination lock. And unless you get all those three numbers aligned, the kind of economic system and the politics and the culture, any one by itself, and you're still locked. So yes, getting a transparent economic process, as well as decision making, as well as cultural shift in what we think is of who we think we are and who we know we are. All those are kind of crucial, but you can't work on it all at the same time. That's the other thing. So you need to focus on the bit you're doing and hope that other people are working on other parts and connect with each other in that way. Okay, I'm just aware of time. Shall I just touch on the Porty stuff next? Would that be good? Eva, can you move to the next slide, the 41 slide? One of my many unskills is sharing slides. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of mention briefly, like I say, I was just come from a meeting this afternoon outside the police station where we're looking at with the police are going. They haven't said they're going to offload it. They haven't used it for a few years. They're obviously going to offload it. And this is another thing to remember is that it's always too early to do anything until it's too late to do something. So you need to get in early. Don't wait for the local authority to have decided or the police to have decided or whoever it is about whatever it is. Anticipate what is going to happen and then start setting things up to be able to deal with that rather than waiting. You'll always be told by those in authority. Well, my experience in Africa and here is you're always told, well, it's not the right moment. Wait. And then, oh, you should have told us before. It's too late. You can't do that. So it's always too early until it's too late. So it's really key to be too early with these processes if you can. So we're seeing with the police station whether we can take that over. But I guess, so in terms of coming back to the Heart Talk Porty process, which if you remember was kind of 14 conversations that happened over a weekend and was kind of led into by a kind of visioning process that Eva led in Belfield, which we'd taken back into community ownership.
I'll
Again,
be down in like a few minutes. Okay.
Hey, nice to hear you, Jay. So it was held in Belfield where we'd taken. So it was the first urban community right to buy, and I just learned today it's the only urban community right to buy that's been successful, which is drastic. So there's this big land reform flagship and this big kind of community lands flagship, and actually the reality is that a reasonably well-off community like Portobello has been able to put in a vast amount of human hours and resources and all the rest of it to be able to make something happen, and it's going very well. But actually, it's not been made possible for communities in general, and that's really. I just heard that today, sorry, so I'm feeling a bit despondent around that bit, but I'm glad that we managed to, and what came out of the Heart Talk conversations that day, if you remember, it was distributed conversations, so it wasn't one assembly altogether, it was people following whatever, it was an open space type approach. The community fridge was one of the key parts that came out of that, which has been a really successful process, which is focused, so it's a weekly community fridge, bringing food from supermarkets, sharing it out amongst people, and it's focused on being environmental, so there's no notion of stigma attached to it. This is about stopping food waste. It's entirely environmental in theory. In reality, people have been really queuing up because they need the food. But it's such a nice way, it's a nice example of where you focus what you're doing slightly differently so that there's not the stigma attached while you're also addressing another need, a social need, which shouldn't be there at all. It's also a community cinema has taken off from that. Seafield, an area right next to us, which is supposed to create a community of about the same size as Portobello on an old industrial site where there's a lot of car showrooms that are gradually moving elsewhere. We've been very involved in that process to try and shape that. And in fact, that's not going ahead at the moment because of the Scottish Government shifting so that it is taking climate change seriously in planning. Now, this shifted 2 years ago. Prior to that, climate change was something in the future and really didn't need to take into account. It was my experience in terms of planning. Suddenly, about a year and a half ago, the various laws came into effect, policies came into effect, and actually you suddenly have to actually be serious about sea level rise and about storm surges here on the Forth, where we live. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but that was a big part of what followed on. And there was a lot of other initiatives that were again around people individually taking action, and also around reshaping the organization that I'm in, Action Porty, which is did the community buyout so that it can then act in a way that facilitates and enables other initiatives to happen, including the community fridge within it, but also in this example just now with the police station, so that trying to create the structure that Eva was describing in Torry, and it's not at all got the democratic inclusivity it should have. I mean, it does on paper, but it hasn't got that in reality. It doesn't yet have the kind of assembly processes built into it, which I would really hope we can move on to next to make sure that it is really inclusive and really energizing, rather than a bunch of folk working very hard behind the scenes to make things happen for everybody else, and everybody else saying, great, thank you very much, which is nevertheless a really good thing to do, because that does then show people that change is possible. So I don't want to criticize myself or others for getting on with being the ones doing stuff if you've got the resources to do that, because that does show people it's possible, but that nevertheless needs to be translated into a form where everybody is involved and included in its process. So I'm hoping with the police station, people like me will let go of being so controlling, because I've got very strong ideas of what I want to happen there, and be able to put that to one side and really create a process that involves everybody to make that decision, but involves them. The fear I have, and I'll just end with this one, the fear I have is always that people, if we're not out of our business as usual mindset, then what we think is possible and what we do is not what needs to happen. It's not very radical. So there's something about creating the imaginative space for people to meet, which is what we're trying to say with these assemblies, where people can meet and really think outside of the box and be very inspired. And the retrofit example from Torry is a good example of somebody coming in with a really strong idea and a strong sense of what should happen, and people being very inspired by that and picking up on that. So yeah, I'll end with that. It's just, there's been a lot has happened out of that assembly, but it's not been a one thing. And I guess that's part of what, looking back at Torry, is the same. There wasn't just one thing that came out of that. There was a whole range of things. But the key thing is to be able to create a structure, I think, that then allows this to carry on. And I would say in Porty, we have that to some extent already, but we don't have it in the way, at the depth that we need. And sorry, I meant to say that slide of the, I don't know if you saw that groin, the wood, it's called a groin, the wooden structure going into the sea that holds the sand. We have a beach here that gets washed away to some degree. So about, I think 30, 40 years ago was the last time of dumping a lot more sand on the beach. And there's real serious issues around sea level rise and storm surges here in Portobello, and a lot of the sand's been gouged out by the storms we've been having. And ironically, we're looking at an assembly that focuses on climate change. And this is ironic because Eva and I were both focused on climate change along with others for decades, and still am, but we tried to shift our focus to include issues that matter to other people. So decentering climate, so as to be able to start from the system that's driving the problem rather than staying focused on climate. So, well, how do we address the system driving it? But ironically, here in Portobello, focusing on climate is a way now, as people have become aware, of drawing in a lot of people, it seems, because their own homes are under really severe threat unless we do something immediately and here, as well as addressing the systemic issue. So that was my little ironic end. Okay, I think that's, I don't know if, I can't quite remember even what, I mean, in terms of the Scottish Climate Assembly, I guess the only thing to say about that, I mean, I think others here may have been involved in that. There was a lot of good process in the Scotland-wide Climate Systems Assembly, which I was involved. I was on the steering group of until, for quite a period, until we needed to leave. There's a lot of really good discussion came out of it. A lot of good ideas came out of it. They then found, I think it was 80% of those ideas were already, the recommendations were already, in theory, being enacted by the Scottish Government. So those people who participated in the assembly were then incredibly frustrated to find that they'd been undertaking a process where they hadn't been really fully informed about the level of crisis we're in, and they hadn't been fully informed about what was already happening in terms of policy. So they were recommending policies which were in theory happening. As we know, for those who've been following what's been happening in Scotland, the targets are not being met, the targets are being dropped, the climate change target's been dropped, which is because the kind of policies that were in place were policies, but they weren't being followed. They weren't actually happening. So recommendations were put in place by the Assembly that were good recommendations, but these were recommendations that were already there on paper. And the whole issue, as those of us from Extinction Rebellion at the time that were part of the process, were trying to say, we need to be assessing what we're really doing and not be dreaming up targets for what we might want to do or policies. We need to actually go, okay, what's the driver here and how do we address that, rather than how do we tinker with targets on the edge of it. So I guess just key in that experience was that the assembly itself was superb in terms of seeing that ordinary citizens can consider the evidence and come to really good conclusions from that. But they have to have the breadth of evidence. They have to be fully informed of the range of options and the range of issues we're up against, rather than be given a very narrow kind of range that then just fits the status quo and doesn't allow them to really think fully. So on the last weekend, lots of them didn't turn up. when they were supposed to turn up to meet with the Scottish government folk and so on. Lots of them didn't turn up because actually they were pretty disappointed having put in such a huge amount of work. So assemblies, even at that level, national level, work brilliantly, but they have to have the full range of possibilities and the full range of perspectives on the problem rather than a status quo range, because status quo range will just give you a status quo solution, which is not what assemblies need to do. So that was just a little additional rant there. Sorry. It seems like either we're just giving a rant here at the end. This end with a rant. Just the idea.
This is what we really think.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
No, I think we've been pretty upfront about what we really think.
Okay.
I mean, I guess what we're talking about is like, what do we think are meaningful outcomes? And they can be very big, they can be very small. But you need to feel like there's been a chance for people to really think freely and ambitiously about how change can happen, because it clearly needs to happen in so many different ways. So yeah, things like the Citizens' Assembly in the Scottish Government ran was so frustrating, because it wasn't as though nobody said to them. And really, for me, as you know, a designer of these kinds of processes, the idea that you wouldn't brief people on what was already happening before you asked them to think about, is that adequate and what else should happen, is just like such a waste of their time. They spent 80% of their time just coming up with what the Scottish Government had already come up with. And that's a pretty unforgivable waste of people's time, even if everything else was equal. So it's past, and I'm wondering whether a little break for to get a cup of tea or go for a pee or both might be in order. We could maybe come back at, Justin, good idea of time. No,
Come back
just need to
22.
22.
Yeah.
Does that suit folk?
Yeah, but before we move on, I just want to say thank you very much for going through all of that and sharing the repercussions of the work you did. It's very inspiring.
Oh, great.
Instilling that hope and belief.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, do think about, while you're in your break, just think about things that you would like to talk more about, questions that you might have, or, and especially, like, I guess, concerns and worries you might have. Because this is like the last time for a while that we maybe get together to really think about them. So use it. We'll see you at 22. So you can hear. Welcome back. So thanks, Barbara. We have had a couple of thoughts about things places we could go if there aren't pressing issues from you guys, but maybe there are. So stick your hand up if you want to say something. Really, no? Okay. Well, the thing that stood out to me from a couple of comments before the break was around, okay, so you do an assembly in your community, that's great, but how do we get from that to changing the system of politics throughout the entire world? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been brewing around, I don't know, feeding the appetite for assemblies, trying to make this feel more real for people. And then I think Justin was going to talk more about some sort of like higher level ideas about national assemblies. Sorry, Justin.
I'm sorry, can I just jump in? So I meant to say one thing first, which was because there's a conversation in the chat been going on around community buyouts and so on. And it's a very practical bit, because I'll forget to say it, which is that what we're exploring today was the difference between a community buyout, where you need to get in, this is but talking about the situation in Scotland under the legal system we've got here, where you need to get 10% of community behind something, you get a whole lot of signatures. There's a huge amount of work that has been pointed out in the chat is involved in doing a buyout for somewhere. Asset transfer is very different. So just want to put that in the for, I think, is it Brian and Philip in particular, Barbara? Just that's so asset transfer, you don't have to do so much. Yeah. So that's just a whole different. So there are two routes there. But sorry, Eva, I just wanted to say that
That's
because
all right.
yet, and I'm happy to discuss that with anybody by email or whatever later or on WhatsApp. So, sorry, go ahead.
Right. So, in no particular order, in the order that I remember them, I think we mentioned that we went to a forum theatre workshop a couple of weekends ago, and it was great. It was really, really interesting, and felt like it could be a really good approach as part of a kind of engagement strategy. So it could be something that you would do in a community before you had an assembly. The basic idea is that you do the kind of things that we were talking about in terms of going out and talking to people, finding out what the issues are, and then you either as a group of people coming from the outside or as a group of local people create a play that tries to embody and display some of the really difficult issues, some of the ones that don't have a solution, the ways that things in this community always just fail to get what it is that we want. And then you invite the audience to come and create different endings. Like, so what would happen if we did, would that change things? What would happen if we did this other thing? So it's a nice technique, and we are pals with the guy who organized it, who does forum theatre and another sort of theatre, legislative theatre. And we're talking to him about running a workshop for people who want to run assemblies or who are interested in assemblies. And he's super keen. So that's something that will be coming up probably after the summer, probably in person, probably in Edinburgh. So we will definitely let you know as that comes up, but I can't see any reason why not to do it. And it just feels like a no-brainer. It's like an extra skill, a way that we can meet and have some fun together as a bunch of people who are interested in democracy, and something that we can then have some additional skills to throw in and bring people in a completely different way, which is one of the things that we've been talking about.
So
Was there something that?
Yeah, no, just on that, just so this is about people, a group of you undertaking kind of theatre piece, but it's not theatre as in you have to work out lots of acts and stuff. It's just trying to enact a situation. It may be in a situation at the GPs or a situation at the dole or whatever, a community situation or a situation in relation to authority, and how normally it's in relation to authority and how you respond, and then people step in to try and suggest other ways of responding. So it's a way of being creative, and it's what we're trained out of. Certainly in this country, we're trained out of thinking that we can do that. There are people over there who can do theatre, we can't. And it's relearning that, of course, this is called play, and all kids know how to play, and we're all actually kids and we can play. So let's play seriously in this way and really think about it. It gets you out of the kind of thinking as usual and allows you to enact a situation and think about other alternatives. So yeah, really hope people can come if you're in Scotland, and hope we can maybe do something online at some point. But anyway.
Something online about that? What, or something else?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could ask Gavin whether he could run something online as well for folk who aren't here. But
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's possible. Another thing that's just at the very beginning of being thought about is a national, i.e. UK-wide gathering of people who are practicing or have skills in that might feed into this grassroots democracy. I'm quite surprised because it was not something that I was even thinking about a month ago, because I look at England and I just think, Jesus Christ, what hope is there? But apparently people in England have got hope. And so hopefully we will bring something together again, probably on the other end of the summer, that would be UK wide, and actually also some people coming from Europe. So there may be some funds to support some people traveling from Europe who would be interested to come and join in. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on that. And the third thing is, somebody else that we're working with who's in the process of going around Scotland, convening kind of small groups of people for really, really informal chats. And it's almost like it's the opposite end from trying to have a National Assembly. It's having really kind of happenstance, serendipity. Oh, you just happened to hear about that evening. Come along and we'll have a chat about it. What's going on your part of the world? What are the big issues? Kind of conversations. But he's doing it in like 12 or 14 different places in the country, and is then going to bring all of that input together to think about, well, is there juice in that? Is there enough in common from the different kind of areas and places that people live in Scotland? Is there an issue which we could bring people together for a National Assembly on? Because I think, again, one of the theories that we've had that we really want to test is, if you know that your community assembly, one of the things that it's doing is preparing to feed into a National Assembly, it creates a fourth pathway. It creates somewhere that we've made up for the outputs of your assembly to go to, that's meaningful, because it's us, the people, getting together to talk and discuss and decide what it is that we want without being told what it is we can have first. So again, it's a kind of made up sketch, but with the hope that in doing that made up sketch, we can fire people's imaginations, we can learn a whole lot about how these things work, and possibly even get some amazing projects that wouldn't have happened otherwise, where people are kind of connecting across communities, or where we've thought of this like really new way of dealing with a big problem that lots of people have. So that's not going to be till next year. But yeah, it feels really, really exciting, and we will, as always, make sure that we let you know about it. Justin.
Yeah, so we joined David for the first one he did up in Skye. And basically there are kind of three themes to it. So there's culture, which can be music, or can be all sorts of things. So there are quite a lot of artists there, musicians and so on, people focused on language, on Gaelic and so on. So there's culture, and then there's land ownership, and then there's power. So those were the three themes. So though it's informal, it was actually quite powerfully focused as well at the same time. So people sharing about the differences. So the grandparents who could speak Gaelic, and then the parents who were stopped from speaking it, and then the kids who are trying to relearn the language and so on. And then land is, economics is basically land. It's like, how do you relate to the living world, and how do we sustain it and be sustained by it? So that kind of, I think economics is just abstracted for those flows of relationship that sustain us, and so on. And then power, in terms of, in that case, who owns the land and who makes decisions and how do we make decisions together. So it does feel like we realize we need to step back a bit to these much smaller, more grassroots conversations that don't have big assemblies as part of them yet, and then to be able to come through. So it's kind of stepping back to be able to move forward. And he's going to be doing that in the cities as well as in the country, and we're joining him for various of those. So yeah, just adding to what you just said.
And it occurred to me that it might be good to just send on the WhatsApp group the various areas that he's planning to go to, because if any of you, beg your pardon, if any of you live in or near them, it could be that you could get in touch with him and help to sort of bring people in, and certainly go yourself to one of the chats, which, yeah, the Skye one was really fun, and certainly for me as an outsider, quite a revelation as to how it is to live on Skye, and what the issues are. Yeah, so Justin, you were going to also look at a kind of bit more on kind of national level assemblies. Yes, you're muted.
Of course, I have to be muted. It's important. I have to mute myself, otherwise I'll be speaking all the time. Yeah, I guess just before that, there's something about I'm coming back to the practicalities of asset transfer and community. This is Scotland focused, okay, but at the moment there's the legislation coming through is very much around kind of. So these are just words, okay? I'm not saying they're actually going to make any real changes, but it's around well-being economy and all that stuff. So what we found with the successful buyout we did here in this bit of town was we did it at just the moment that the legislation came in that was suddenly about to apply to urban areas. And it's really key to find the language that you use for something aligns with the cutting edge of where politicians are making a change. So I just want to, if you're focused on any particular area, whatever it is, make sure that well-being economy is your leading line when you're going for the funding or the persuasion of local authorities or national authorities or whatever else. It's always key to look at, like I say, they always say it's too early and then it's too late. So you need to make sure you're too early, but it's also really important to look at what they are just about to do, what those in power are just about to do, and then make sure that your language is in touch with that, not in what was done last week or last month or last year, because that won't work anymore. You always frame what you're doing as pilots, and so it looks like it's going to do something else. And then those pilots they don't tend to fund more than pilots because structural change is not happening. It has to happen from us. It's not going to happen from the top. So you always frame what you're doing as a pilot that's about to lead to other bigger changes, and that will get funding. And then there won't be something that follows on from that unless we collectively make that happen. So I just wanted to jump on, maybe show that next slide then, Eva, would that be good? So this was kind of coming from I was at a conference in Oxford with all the kind of assembly people who do deliberative democracy and all that kind of stuff, and listening to them and contributing to that. And so the cartoon in this, sorry, I'm in joke and cartoon mode, which I apologize for because they're probably pretty awful. The cartoon in this on the left, no, yes, on the left should, I'm going to share it with everybody. Okay, no. Okay, so first give you a moment to appreciate the joke. Okay, so I hope you got that one. And it's not quite as black and white as that. It's more, so I'm just suggesting around assemblies, thinking about how you present what you're doing, whichever of those you believe, whether you think the system is broken and it must be fixed, or the system is working exactly as intended and must be destroyed. I know which one I think, but whichever you think, how you present what you're doing when you're dealing with power is quite important. So sometimes you would present what you're doing as being, this is just to help politicians arrive at a better decision. So that's the first one there. Assemblies to support politicians to change what needs to change. So basically giving them the evidence that means that they can say, look, the population at large wants to have action on climate change, whatever else. So you'd have a climate citizen assembly to do that. So basically they feel locked into their 5-year cycles or 4-year cycles of electoral voting. So they can't do anything that rattles the cage. Otherwise they won't be re-elected. And so assemblies can be seen as being supporting them to be able to make the changes that are needed. So it's basically about better informing the current system, maintaining current politics, and that can be a good way of framing what you're doing in particular situations. Yeah, so even though I would go with the second point, which is I think the dominant system we have is not something that is breaking down, it's something that is based on breaking down relations. To me, that's the key thing to catch is people think, oh, the system is breaking down, but actually it's been breaking down relations between people and between ecologies and so on. It's based on breaking down relations and then exploiting those. So, for example, I was in Liberia working there. Ministry of Agriculture came along to basically inform the villages where I was that they were all going to be shoved off their land where they were rice farming and so on, in order to be able to create huge palm oil plantations that were just leaving a desert. So the intensely beautiful forests, fantastic communities in amazing, such a rich biodiverse land. And then when palm oil companies come, you basically create a desert with palm oil trees reliant on human mechanical, chemical intervention to be able to maintain them. And the Minister of Agriculture was saying to people, we don't want you to be growing rice and food for yourselves. We want you to be working for the companies to earn the money to buy the rice and food you need. So the system is based in that way on breaking people's relationship with the land and with each other. So you're then reliant on it to be able to, you have to feed it to be able to get fed yourself. So thinking about the system as breaking down and that being the problem we're in, which is what that first joke quote is, system is broken, it must be fixed, is one way of thinking about it and the way that we're generally taught to think about it. But thinking about it as being, this is how the system works. It does break relations apart and exploits them. That's the logic of it. It's not anybody's individual's fault. It's a logic of capitalism. It has a very different way of looking at it. Another way that there's 3 ways. So the second way of thinking about assemblies is about it as being kind of anti-politics. We can get rid of adversarial politics, we can get rid of conflict, we can just have nice facilitated meetings where people listen to each other's needs and they work out how you can both get your needs met and so on, which is absolutely true. And that's how it can work in societies I'm engaged in East Africa, where people are fundamentally equal. They can have different levels of ownership, but nobody will be left to starve. Nobody will be left homeless. It would be unthinkable in most indigenous communities to walk past somebody who's got nothing, to not make sure somebody has everybody's welcome by the fire and welcome to share a meal and welcome to sleep inside. That's just normal human decency. The idea that you would just walk by people is crazy. So there's inequality in those communities in terms of how many cows you've got or whatever else, but there's not that fundamental inequality that leads to a fear that your kids won't eat, or unless you stay in this job, you won't be able to take care of your family and so on. So in that second mode, assemblies can be thought of as, let's all get on well together and talk with each other. But it's an anti-politics approach, which doesn't really address the fact that we do have an unequal system that we need to address too. So though humans are perfectly capable of meeting together, listening deeply to each other and making decisions based on hearing each other's needs, we also need to address a system which is designed to do the opposite of that. And that's where this third approach to assemblies comes in, which is the one obviously that we've been advocating, which is about reclaiming power from a power over system, relearning power with, relearning an ability to relate and take care of each other. And in that, though, it's not simply the skills of facilitation, the skills of meeting, and so on. There's also the need to address the fundamental inequalities driving conflict. And that's why you saw in the Tory Assembly that last 2 or 5 and 6, I think it was, of the Assembly, what we will do was about addressing that system driving inequality, was about addressing the systemic problems too. So having said that, I think it's important to be able to shift how you present what you're doing. So I just staying with this. Whoa, okay, not staying with this slide. It's fine, leave it. Okay. So though you may be approaching it in the way that I think we're advocating, which is to be thinking about the need for system transformation, it's not always the best thing to present what you're doing in that way. So which isn't to be duplicitous, because what you're doing will be informing politicians or the local authority, giving them good information about how they could change. But as I think Brian was saying earlier, you don't then necessarily expect them to change. You approach it in that way, you give the information, but you know that actually when push comes to shove, the real change is going to happen from the people, not from those currently in positions of power. And then that second approach, presenting assemblies as being just a good space for good dialogue to happen, is true. And it's a really good thing to be engaged in. So that can be a good way of presenting things to a community, but also being able to bring in the systemic issues, being clear that, for example, we had the community buyout here, but it's not happened anywhere else in Scotland since then, because there hasn't been the systems put in place. In fact, the social land reform, the amount of money put towards community buyouts has dropped from 10 million to 5 million in the current budget. So it's dropped by half. So there's a, like I said, get in at the pilot phase of anything, and the next pilot is well-being economics. So grab that while it's there before they move on to the next trendy thing. So presenting what you're doing in any of those 3 ways, I think, is important. Not having to present something as being systemic change, but presenting it as giving good information to those in power, or presenting it as just a way for people to be able to talk better together, because they do generally do both of those, even if your main underlying aim is to enable people to see the need for transformation. Yeah, I think that was sorry, I may have gone on too long there, but that was just wanted to throw those out, because it's again just being tactical. It's kind of not, all of this is happening in a world, in a society where things look stuck, but they're not. They're shifting all the time in the right or wrong way. So keeping an antenna out on that, and then being able to frame your assembly so it draws people into it, creates a real safe space for people to be able to talk with each other, but also enables for real outputs from it by addressing those in power, or by enabling the community to act, or by linking with other communities and other movements. Sorry, can I just one more thing? Just so the work I'm doing in East Africa, we're starting now. We've been supporting indigenous communities, forest communities, pastoralists to meet together over the last few years in assemblies, and they're now linking. There's been huge flood. I don't know if you've seen, but there's been huge flooding in East Africa, really drastic flooding, and I was there, and it was really awful. I mean, there's somewhere in Nairobi, in one of the poorest areas, where 30 people had been drowned the night before because they don't have anywhere to live, so they live by the river, because that's land where you're not supposed to live, and therefore you're drowning. The government, rather than responding by coming in to help, responded by coming in to bulldoze the homes that were left. So it was like a really drastic. So what we're looking at now is supporting the urban communities to link with the rural communities, which is quite a huge shift, because they've got very different approaches. But the next assembly we're having is hopefully, which I'm hoping Eva will be at too, in Kenya, will be drawing together indigenous communities, but also rural urban communities who are very much more aware of the vicious structure they're up against in a way. And I think that's going to be really interesting learning between the two.